Our chief guest for this session, ladies and gentlemen, will be Mr. Suresh Prabhu, Honorable Union Minister for Indian Railways. The 21st century is dubbed as the century of cities for India. But most of the development, as we all know, is concentrated in the urban areas. Upgrading this urban infrastructure and planning new cities to help decongest existing urban centers is an emerging challenge. This is what we're talking about, and we're raising some pertinent questions in this regard. Will the difficulty in acquiring land, complex project approval mechanisms, limited funds, and lack of skilled as well as unskilled manpower prove to be a stumbling block to this challenge? Our upcoming session number 2, Infrastructure, Can New Cities and Corridors Change India's Landscape, raises a debate on these issues and many more. We are, of course, honored to have with us as chief guest for this session, Mr. Suresh Prabhu, Honorable Union Minister for Indian Railways. Let's have a big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. We also have Mr. Kamal, Nath, former Minister, Urban Development. Keep the applause coming, as I say. Mr. Pradeep Singh, CEO, ISB Mohali. Mr. Rajesh V. Shah, Co-Chairman and Managing Director, Mukand Limited. And our moderator for this session, Mr. Vinayak Chatterjee, Chairman, Feedback Infrastructure Services. Welcome, gentlemen. It's over to you.
Thank you. Mic's working, right? So let's get into the friends. Good morning and warm welcome. Guests have already been welcomed, so I'm not going to repeat that. And let's dive into the session straight away. The session is New Cities and Corridors. So as the chief guest this morning, my first question will be to Sri Suresh Prabhuji. Sir, all of us are familiar with dedicated freight corridors. New Delhi to Mumbai, which I suppose is funded by Japanese agencies, and Ludhiana, Kolkata, or Dankuni, which I believe is funded by the World Bank. These two are well known. But the question I have for you is, and I'm picking up something what you yourself said, the railways is today operationally hugely challenged. Out of the roughly 1126 or 29 odd sections, more than 50%, areas around Mughal Sarai and similar other areas, more than 50% of the railway sections are carrying loads which are more than 100% of their design capacities. Should we be focusing on new corridors, or should we be focusing on getting these 650 bottlenecks which are costing the nation dear up and running? And what is your plan for the same? Because both draw on scarce capital. So what is your sense of priority in new corridors versus getting the 600 or so bottlenecks in terms of existing corridors de-bottlenecked?
No, you're absolutely right. In fact, you are little charitable to me by saying it's more than 100%. In fact, some of them are even operating 150% capacity. And therefore, that's what I mentioned in my budget speech, that our first priority is to decongest, and this is the low-hanging fruit which will bring in the best of the benefits in the shortest possible time. So the whole process is actually aimed at decongesting the existing bottlenecks to bring in wherever is feasible, where there's a single line, put second line, where there's a second line, put a third line. In fact, if you have noticed that the benefit of such an intervention is far, far better in terms of payback, financial, commercial, or otherwise, than putting up a new line. So therefore, new line is obviously is a must, because over a period of time. But immediate sense, if there is a patient is suffering, then you don't look at how whether you should give vitamins, etc. That is little later. You think about his regime much later. You first perform a surgery to find out how do you actually make him survive, and that is what is the biggest challenge. So we are focusing on that. We have identified some of these sections where these bottlenecks are there, and the whole investment, in fact this 1 lakh crore plus investment that we are planning in this year, largely it is devoted for such lines. While we work on that, as you correctly pointed out, the dedicated freight corridor, eastern and western, they are already underway. Hopefully we should be able to complete them in the next 3 years time. That would actually also remove bottlenecks of many kinds. Then we'll be able to send the goods train on timetable basis. We'll be able to remove the goods train from normal passenger traffic on the same route, so that more passenger train can be running on the same track. Also, we are thinking about the diamond quadrilateral, which is, in fact, we have to think about it, but it's not, it's at a planning stage. But you are absolutely right in saying that a priority should be this, which can bring in quick results, low cost, and possibly bring benefit to the people. Just along with that, we are planning what we normally call technically traffic facilities. What it really means is creating loops, creating sidings, wherein basically bypassing it. Like for example, when you are going on a road and you park your car on the road and you will leave it. That many of us do that many times. So then automatically all the cars which are going to follow you will get stuck. So if you can just remove the car and put it in the parking lot, it will actually create a space. That is what exactly happens to the railways. So if you are creating something like traffic facilities to actually bring in short-term benefits very quickly. So that is also part of the same study that you mentioned. But I'm very happy that you are talking about it because it's exactly what we really need to do.
Thank you, sir. I am now going to switch to my left. We have seen Mr. Kamal Nath in many incarnations. I think it is interesting for all of us to note, and I'm going to request you to give him a big hand. You have in front of you India's longest serving member of parliament in the Lok Sabha. Am I right, sir? Does that call for an entry in the Guinness Book of Records? I mean, much beyond the Limca Book of Records. So congratulations, sir. As I said, we have seen you in many incarnations. We have seen you handling many ministries. But the last one was topical, in a sense, is related to the topic this morning. You were urban minister. So therefore, this whole business of smart cities, you know, when we first read the BJP manifesto, much of the Indian public thought that, this country is going to get 100 new cities, right? And will take care of the rural urban migration, etc. It is now increasingly becoming clear that this whole greenfield business has slowly being morphed into brownfield. And the last notification that came out of the urban ministry, maybe last week or week before that, is that something like a city challenge contest, that the cities that put together the best plans are going to get funding to make them smart. So we have quietly, I think, and I'm asking your opinion on the matter, has the needle moved from greenfield to brownfield? And is this now beginning to look like a JNURM version 3?
Well, the first thing to remember is that urbanization in India has happened more by default than by design. And having happened by default, we see this huge morass, this urbanization which is in an utter state of collapse. There has been some elements of slightly good, not good, but slightly good urbanization. Now, smart cities is a nice catchword. And smart cities is not a new word, it's a catchword, but what do we mean by smart cities? You talk about greenfield and brownfield. Whether it's greenfield or brownfield, how do you go about smart cities? What is the definition? Can anybody here define to me? There are as many definitions of smart cities as the number of people sitting here. That what is a smart city? Is smart city just making it IT enabled? Is it a holistic approach of sewage, water, housing, electricity, roads, pavements, market areas? Now, one flaw which has been there is our city development plans. Now, by city, I don't mean cities like Delhi. We must recognize one thing. Greater urbanization is taking place, not into metropolitan cities as a percentage. It's taking place from class 2 cities, tier 2 cities to tier 3 cities, tier 3 cities to tier 4 cities, and then to metropolitan cities as a percentage. So you see a town, a municipality of 100,000 people. Now this 100,000 is growing by 30 or 40%, which is not even in the case of Delhi. Though the number may be small, but you add the number of small cities, add the number of these 1 lakh cities, it's a huge thing. Now we are going to have about 40% of urbanization by 2030. What is the kind of urbanization if we put a tag on it of a smart city? Are we going to make 10 years development plans? Who's going to make these 10-year development plans? Is there capacity? One of the great failures of all the money, the JNURM which was spent in the last decade, was there were no proper plans. And I remember inaugurating one project, urban project. And when I looked at it, I went there, it was a completed project. I said, what is this nonsense? Who made this project? Who's the chief municipal officer? And the elected member said, Oh, these plans were made by the contractor. There was nobody else to make it. It was made by the contractor because nobody knows how to even make a plan here. So I'll come to that a bit later, but I want to end this by saying that we got to ensure, not by giving tags, not by calling smart cities. If we choose 100 smart cities, do we know the number of, what do we call a city to start with? Is it a municipality? Is it a municipal corporation? Is it a Nagar Panchayat of 30, 40,000 people? What is a urban area? And we have defined urban areas as being a Nagar Panchayat, which is about 30, 40,000, a municipality, which is 1 lakh, 1 lakh plus, and a municipal corporation, which is much bigger. You have larger towns become municipal corporations. So all three have to be looked at differently. There's no one size fits all, because the abilities, the capacities, the skills available in the larger municipal corporations is not available in the smaller ones. And that is where the percentage, the number is larger of those. And if you add that number across the country, the total, forget the percentage, even the number of people will be much more. So that is the challenge.
Okay, you posed a challenge, and I'm going to respond to that challenge and pass the question to Pradeep Singh. The challenge is, what is a smart city, right? I mean, everybody has their own way of grasping the elephant and defining what the animal is. So I'm going to read out to you 10 criteria that defines a smart city, and I'm going to ask you, okay, I'll ask the question later. Let me read them out to you. The 10 elements that are popularly believed to define a smart city. Number 1 is ICT-enabled governance, information communication technology. 2, efficient utilities, energy, water, and solid waste effluents. Number 3, meaningful PPPs. Number 4, safety and security. Number 5, financial sustainability. Number 6, citizen participative local government. Number 7, sufficient social capital. Number 8, transit-oriented habitats. Number 9, green features. And last, minimum population criteria, that it should not be a collection of buildings and we call it a smart city, but it should have at least 1 lakh population. First, do you agree with this definition, or do you think these 10 points are an inadequate or unrepresentative definition of what a smart city is? And 2, having responded to that, do you think that we are in danger of this whole smart city concept being captured by the IT companies who make presentations all over the place, which say that as long as you have smart ICT, whether it is the Cisco's or the IBM's or the Indian companies, saying as long as you have smart governance on your iPad or mobile, that defines a smart city. So I'm asking you to respond to these 2 broad questions, the definition and...
Vinayak, allow me to be a bit boring. I know this is tempting to fall into this trap of going down the list and getting into the planning issues, the implementation issues, the financing issues, the definitional issues, split here, get into an intellectual gymnastic exercise in figuring out what's a smart city, what should be done to get it, and so on and so forth. Like I said, I want to be a bit boring because, over the decades, we've been to many of these conferences, maybe not as many as high profile as this one, but the fact remains that the cities of this country have gone from bad to worse, steadily. Ideas have been generated, definitions have been debated, strategies have been outlined, and it's not rocket science. Every morning when you drive to work for 45 minutes, you can see around you what's the problem, you can see around what the solution should be, the quality of the air, the quality of the traffic, the quality of the road, the quality of solid waste disposal around you, the sewage, it's all there. And what you need to do is also pretty much obvious. The question is, how are we going to translate what should be done to what will be done? Okay, why doesn't it happen? Everyone knows about it. And there, I think, if I was to pick, and I could come back to your list, if I was to pick one driver of this transition from what should happen to what will happen, it is smart governance, better governance, call it what you like, driven by a smart citizen, an educated citizen, an informed citizen, if you like. Until we get that in place, until the delegation of powers that was promised in the 74th Amendment decades ago does not remain a relegation of powers rather than a delegation of powers, we're not going to see any of this happen. So it's kind of frustrating to keep debating and discussing and outlining what you do. The fact is, nothing is going to happen unless there is accountability. Who is accountable for fixing that pothole? Whose head rolls when the same road breaks down every 6 months and my money is spent on repairing it? I can see it being wasted because of corruption, because of lack of.
Pradeep, I think we've got
so the citizens now. What the opportunity that happens to be available to us today, dramatically, is using information technology, using all other forms of related technologies to bring the citizen center stage, put the horse before the cart, then start driving. Otherwise, we're just going backwards.
Okay. I'm going to pick up something and pass the baton to Rajesh. See, when I asked Mr. Kamal Nath the question, is it greenfield or brownfield? Much of his answer related to definition of existing cities and pulling up our existing cities. Pradeep is saying the same thing. Get governance going in the existing cities. Now, if you were to respond as an enlightened citizen, which I know you are, and you had a limited pool of capital, after all, capital is, the pool of capital available with the urban ministry or with the central system is limited, would you go for building 100 new cities, or would you use that capital to upgrade the hard infrastructure as well as the capacity building that people are talking about better governance? What would you do as a citizen, and what would your message be to the current government? You want 100 new cities, or you want cities, existing cities, to be upgraded?
But since we all live in a city somewhere in India, this is a matter of the greatest concern, as Mr. Pradeep Singh mentioned, that our cities are deteriorating and becoming more and more difficult to live in. And especially if you have a city like Mumbai, which you woke up this morning to, that a development plan, which has been in the making for a very long time, has to be scrapped because more than 25,000 objections come in and is gone. So this is one of our major cities. 70–80% of people live in slums. And what sort of a life it is for anybody who doesn't have a fancy flat and a nice car and driver, it is quite shocking. So I think the answer to what you're saying is so obvious. And we have so many different types of cities, whether it's a habitation of 50,000 people or more. We have to work towards making examples, whether it's small or bigger, of workable urban environments which are as per the charter of this Jawaharlal Nehru Urban Renewal Mission, which are absolutely impeccable points that have been mentioned there as objectives. All of us agree on these objectives, and which you also listed out in what was mentioned there. How do we create those examples even in a smaller location? How can we incentivize even a state government that you set it up? Now, all this money is never going to come for building 100 new cities straight away. It's only going to, and if we then again leave it to the kind of planners that have done the Mumbai planning, we're going to again get plans which are not going to work. So it's much better to, those are obviously going to have much greater private involvement. Private involvement will come when it makes money, when it's going to have the right kind of funding, interest rates, etc., and a demand. So it's better to start with smaller communities that we can build in and around the existing big cities to the smallest of cities, show that it's possible, and then grow from that. This way.
So, Mr. Prabhu, I'm going to come back to you. I know you want to react to this point, but I have two questions also to pose to you. I think from the drift of the responses that you see among the panelists, and I'm not sure, we will test the audience later during the question hour session, the drift of the responses seem to be that people would prefer focus, attention, and deployment of funds in upgrading our existing cities, but the dream in people's minds during election time and thereafter of the ruling government which you're a part of seems to be fixated in people's minds that this government is going to give us 100 new cities. So I want you to respond to that. Are we really still on the new cities agenda, or is it greenfield, brownfield, and in what proportion? 5 new cities and 95 old cities upgraded? That's question number one. Question number two concerns the railway ministry also. In the land acquisition ordinance discussions, the definition of a corridor was first put as 15 kilometers around a road, or could also be defined as a railway corridor. During discussions, the amendments that were put up to the Land Acquisition Act reduced that 15 kilometers because of a lot of popular uproar against 15 kilometers on either side to 1 kilometer. So you are aware of that. So I'm going to pose this question to you. So if I'm building a new national highway or expressway or a rail corridor, should the definition of a corridor where you can acquire land under public purpose, should it be 1 kilometers? Should it be 15 kilometers on either side? Should it be zero or should it be somewhere in between? So two posers to you, sir. Smart city, new or old, and what is your comfort level of a definition of a corridor around a rail line or a highway?
Firstly, whether it should be brownfield or greenfield, I don't think there should be really a debate. We should do both. Because I agree with my friend Kamal Nath when he said that we have to find out a solution specific to a problem. So we really need to work on both. We need to upgrade our existing cities. We need to create new cities as well. If we are going to have something like 600, 700 million, 60, 70 crore people living in cities in the next few years' time, if you don't plan for it, then it will be like the slums coming up all over the country. And that is why our Prime Minister's idea of smart cities is essentially emanating from that. What is smart is, really speaking, it's really a generic definition. So we like smart grid, not just in smart cities. When you say smart grid, what do you mean by smart grid? It means many things. So it's not an exclusive definition, it's an inclusive definition. We have to keep adding new things to it. You gave a very good 10 point. I would add one more if you permit me, is the green space. We actually is there. So we need to open, at least keep open spaces, because that is very critical and very important. And therefore we should try to go as high as possible to make that work. So green cities, smart cities, the cities which will have better participation of people, etc., is an idea which can be applied to both greenfield as well as brownfield cities. And we must work on that. One point I think we need to do is to understand the carrying capacity of each of the cities. You know, in Mumbai, the population has gone to 1.16, 17 million people. In Delhi, even more. Whether the city has a capacity to carry so many people, is it ability to deliver depends upon its capacity to carry. If you keep adding people after people, and then we are going to see that even smart solutions can address that problem, it will to an extent. It will do a much better job if it was not smart. But beyond that point, it is just going to crumble because it is no longer going to take that load. And I mean, both of us have been the Minister of Environment, and we have seen this problem of water, land, the pressure that is put on it, and therefore the green space that is taken away. So I think carrying capacity of each of the city, we really need to decide. Then that will bring us to another little bigger issue. If you add carrying capacity of all the cities, all the towns, then whether India's population can be housed in so many cities. So therefore, we'll have to look at the population as an issue also over a period of time. So that is one. So secondly, talking about this corridor and definition, I wish Mr. Kamal Nath agrees with us so that we can have a much liberal definition, because this is something which also depends upon the ultimate necessity. Because as you know, when the railway line, you were asking me that question a little earlier, when you want to add more lines, as the capacity grows, more capacity is required, you need obviously the land on either side. And therefore, when we talk about corridor, so the whole idea, in fact, many governments have been there when the idea was getting implemented. The whole idea was that you create a dedicated train corridor. Alongside, you create a dedicated industrial corridor. Idea was that basically, when you make something, you need raw materials. So if you have a dedicated freight corridor, you bring the raw material there. When you create a finished goods, you need to export them to some place, either into domestic market or outside. So you have a port connectivity also. So the whole idea came out because industries and the adjoining infrastructure for that will help. So then how much land should be left? You know, always see, for example, had railway, and at that time, of course, there was no such a pressure on land when the Britishers built a railway 160 years ago. Had they not left some land now, probably we cannot do any expansion. I was in Goa the other day, and we want to critically put the second line. The Chief Minister agrees, but there is a community, small people, they are saying we are going to lose our houses. We don't want a second line. Now, this is correct. I mean, we have to have a participatory discussion, everything. But there are very small number of people whose interest is going to be affected, and we must take care of that. But because of that, probably millions of people will not be able to travel. So therefore, if you had left that land already, it could have been used for something else like plantation of trees, create green space. But if the land was available, the expansion could be possible. And therefore, it's anybody's guess whether it should be one or 10, but ultimately, it's a matter of consensus. If all major political parties agree, we can work on the land as a major issue for development of India. We must bring in farmers' benefit. See, you must understand one thing.
Can I interrupt you and ask Mr. Kamal Nath that in this debate between 1 kilometer around a railway track or 15 kilometers for the definition of an industrial corridor, what is the view of your party?
We brought in the land acquisition bill. I think we are digressing to that. I'll be very happy to have a discussion. separate discussion, the land acquisition bill, because it's a part of the land acquisition bill. Very few people understand this. And people say that it's political. I must say, it's not political at all. And if we see the saga of land acquisition, I have personally fought for about 20, 25 years of my life on this land acquisition law which we had in the past, which was nothing which was exploitive, whether it was for dams, I'm not talking about railways, whether it was for industry. The history of this, as you know, of land acquisition started with the public sector, where 1,000 acres for BHEL, 2,000 acres for HMT, wherever their plants are. And the farmers turned into mazdoors because they had nowhere to go. So when we talk about this corridor, what are we saying? We're not saying keep it 1 kilometer. The Act doesn't say that. And this is what is not understood. Nobody has read the Act which we brought in. And I urge everybody to understand and read the Act. We are not saying that, we are saying that up to 1 kilometer or up to 2 kilometers, you will not have to go through a process, a certain process. But if it is more than that, you'll have to go through a certain process. What is that process? It's going to be an impact assessment. What is impact assessment? If I'm a farmer, I have my driver who drives the tractor. I have the chap who cooks my food. So if my land goes, it's not me only who loses the land. Those people lose their subsistence. So what happens about them? And that is what forms the slums of Mumbai. So I agree with Suresh completely when he talks of carrying capacity. We must recognize one thing in India, which again is missed, is totally missed, that India is one of the most dense countries in the world. If you take the total land mass of India and take away from it forest lands, the mountains, the deserts, the water bodies. If you take this away and divide it by our population, India is one of the most dense countries. And the challenge today for the country or for any government is what is going to be the appropriate land use management.
So, you know, we still haven't got a straight answer. The ordinance said 15 kilometers. The amendment to the ordinance brought it down to 1 kilometer. I somewhere heard 2 kilometers being mentioned by Mr. Nath. So I suppose, sir, that you will have to work this out. But since we have about 10 minutes left, I'm going to actually pose to all the panelists one common political question. That the state, all of you and all of us in civil society sitting in the audience, we are complaining about the quality of urban governance. We have all, in some senses, and I'm addressing this first to the political class on my right and on my left, in 1974, as a nation, we recognized it and we passed a constitutional amendment called the 74th Amendment, which in short, within inverted commas, asked this nation and its towns and cities to take charge of their own destiny. So you were urban minister, sir, you've been participating. Now, from 1974 onwards, changing the constitution of a country is a big event, but neither the political class shied away from doing anything about it because it wanted, as we believe, to concentrate power in the state capitals and in New Delhi. You really did not follow the spirit of the 74th Amendment. And as civil society, while we agitate on TV on so many issues from corruption to everything else, nobody from civil society, including media, has made sufficient song and dance about the non-implementation of a constitutional amendment called the 74th Amendment, which empowers city managers, city mayors, and city governance, including management of their destiny and their finances. Why have we slipped on this, sir? May I ask you that question? And then I'm going to ask Mr. Suresh Prabhu and then Pradeep and Rajesh.
It was my government which brought in the 74th Amendment. And the states were required under that to empower the municipalities, which we call the city government. Unfortunately, this has not happened. And the multiple agencies which are running cities and municipalities, the multiple agencies, this has been one of the reasons of bad governance. But it's not only the 74th Amendment. I must tell you this, Vinayak. You know, when we talk of, I want to switch just for 1 minute to something else. When we talk of urbanization, we got to talk of suburbanization. There was a catchword called satellite cities. Now the catchword is smart cities. But it all boils down to this, when we talk of carrying capacity, which was just mentioned, that we will have to talk of suburbanization. And that suburbanization has to come by the smart city or whatever you want to give that name, by that route. Because that is the biggest challenge. Suburbanization, what would have happened to Delhi if we hadn't had a Noida and we hadn't had a Gurgaon? What would have happened to Bombay if you did not have the suburbanization which has happened? Backed by an infrastructure. If there's no transportation to suburbanization, if we didn't have the metro coming from Gurgaon to Delhi, if we didn't have the metro now which is expanding into Noida and all parts of Noida, what would have happened? So when you address the issue of urbanization, you have to address the issue of suburbanization. Where governance is concerned, a point which is totally missed, which has been brought out by every single report on urbanization in this country, is the lack of capacity. Do we have town planners? Who, in my district, somebody from the veterinary department is the municipal officer. From the veterinary department. He wants to stay there, so he opts for what? He opts for this job. He opts for being posted to this job on deputation. So he's on deputation from various departments, from the electricity department, as running the municipality. And because we've not had the full implementation of the 74th Amendment, there is no power in the hands of the elected mayor or the elected president of the municipality. There's no power. He is dependent on the state government. You can't pay your salaries. Forget about building the roads. They depend on the state government. The state government says, well, if you depend on us, then what kind of autonomy do you want? What kind of power do you want? They have a point. You have the local MLA who says, listen, this is a part of my constituency. I am elected by a much wider lot of people. So that is the challenge.
You want to comment on the 74th Amendment?
No, in fact, 74th and 73rd you could take together because some are the rural areas, some are for the urban local governments. But you must not generalize, but there are states which are done remarkably well. Say, for example, Kerala, where the Gram Sabhas, which is really speaking the root of democracy, they're functioning very well. In fact, over a period of time. In fact, as I agree with him, nothing to do with the amendment itself, but this is a part of a culture that has developed. So one is, we must really find out the best practices which are available within the country, in some of the states, and try to use them there. Secondly, the challenges of multiple agencies working is a real one. Even in Mumbai, Raju was talking about that. But the problem in Mumbai itself is there are so many agencies. In fact, railways, the municipal corporation, airports, BPT, Mumbai Port Trust, and many others, who will always be transport department and others. So the mayor, the head of that municipal corporation, which has given power by 74th Amendment, has been given power which he cannot exercise because there are other agencies which are using that power. So he can only use that power within a limited realm. So that is a challenge. So I think we really need to also think about this amending in a different way. Actually speaking, the constitution was very clear. When we talked about 74th Amendment, there are 3 Fs: functions, functionaries, and funds. What has happened is functions have been given, somewhere functionaries have been given, but funds are not being given. So I think 2 Fs and 1 F missing, which is the more important one. And therefore they are actually have to all the time be. These are little bit changed thanks to the last 2 finance commissions. The finance commission, probably 12th and 13th, 12th for the first time if I am not mistaken, but definitely the 13th. First time they gave direct resources to the local self-government. Even this 14th finance commission had done already the same thing. So this is something very significant. So what I will see is over a period will happen, but I think again, going by state, going by city, must find out how to reduce these multiple agencies, how to bring them. We always credit some of the great mayors of New York City, including the Bloomberg was there till recently, and Giuliani before him. But because the police was under him, the entire law enforcing agency was under him, the public prosecutor was under him. So even if you want to go and catch somebody in Wall Street, he could do that. And that is why he could be successful. So I think if today we have a mayor of cities who are virtually have nothing else to do, that's why they go and inaugurate so many programs all the time. So I think we can have some other program who can do that. But I think we should really try to find out how we can empower them, give them more authority to executive authority to make it happen.
So Pradeep, do you think we've been, you want to leave, sir? He has to rush back to Parliament. So thank you very much, sir. Thank you for staying on. And we'll carry on with the, thanks. So Pradeep, do you think with this discussion, do you think both the political class and civil society, we have collectively let ourselves down on non-implementing of the 74th Amendment?
I absolutely agree, and thank you for asking this question, which echoes my earlier comment. I think this is the heart of the matter. We have not made city development demand-driven. It's being driven by, the lobbies of contractors and politicians in center and state headquarters. Unless citizens empower themselves, hold the political system responsible, we're going to have what Mr. Suresh Prabhu was referring to. The functions have been relegated, the powers have not been delegated. And unless you do that, and I'm sorry, I don't quite buy the argument of the lack of capacity as being the excuse or the reason for this not happening. I could actually turn it around completely, and I could say that's precisely why we don't have capacity, because we've never allowed the cities to feel their own problems and create the capacity. A river cleans itself as it flows. If you don't allow it to flow, it's going to remain filthy and dirty. Let's make the citizen and the city responsible. Take the responsibilities down to the citizen. He is going to make everybody accountable, or she's going to make everybody accountable. Then the planning process. The other way of doing this, the other parallel way of doing this is, one is through the political process, the other is through the market process. Public-private partnerships, where there are private providers of services who will be then held accountable if they're going to charge for services, we don't appreciate that. We don't see PPPs as not just being a financing instrument, but as being a governance instrument, right? And that's how the 74th Amendment's implementation is going to help.
Rajesh, your view on 74th Amendment.
Thanks. I think this 74th Amendment is so important, and you brought it out for discussion, so it should be highlighted. I think it should come up for discussion between the major parties again, instead of so many other things that are coming up. How do we make this work? How do we create the right examples that these are the standards and the norms? Why is it that every chief minister must have the urban development portfolio? What is that power that it gives? The power to convert, the power to decide FSI. So you take it away from that, and we can see if in our major cities, this idea of carrying capacity, a city like Mumbai, or actually even Delhi, it can be a collection of many cities that are all operating, but based on certain standards that you're trying to put in, which should be part of this 74th Amendment framework.
Okay. So I'm supposed to close this session at 12:35. I suppose one has 1 minute. So instead of the traditional question hour, I'm going to do something that media has taught us all to do very well. I'm going to try that. I'm going to ask all of you that around election time, how many of you, please put up your hands, thought that smart cities meant 100 smart cities meant 100 new cities? How many of you thought so during election time? Well, my feeling is about 40%. How many of you now feel that smart cities is about existing cities? Well, almost double the proportion. So I was just trying to gauge the shift in perception, which maybe, hearing the panelists, is probably the way we should go. So I'm going to request my panelists that to allow me to close the session. It's 12:35, and with very, very warm thanks to you, Kamal Nath ji. Thank you very much. Rajesh, Pradeep, and Mr. Suresh Prabhu in absentia, and thank you to all of you for being patient listeners. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all our esteemed panelists for such a riveting session. I'd like to request Mr. Pavan Munjal to please join us on stage to present mementos to all our panelists. Welcome, sir. Please present a memento to Mr. Kamal Nath. Thank you so much, sir, for taking our time to be with us here today. It's been a riveting session. We've all become smarter thanks to the discussion. I'd also request Mr. Pavan Munjal to please present a memento to Mr. Pradeep Singh, Mr. Rajesh V. Shah, and our moderator for this session, Mr. Vinayak Chatterjee. Thank you so much to all our esteemed panelists. Thank you.